The emergency line crackled to life at 3:17 a.m. in Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital. Nora's calloused fingers wrapped around the receiver, her worn scrubs still damp from the previous patient. The dispatcher's voice was rushed, breathless, a child in distress at 847 Hillcrest Drive. She grabbed her threadbare medical bag and stepped into the bitter Ohio winter night, expecting another cramped apartment in the projects. Instead, wrought-iron gates loomed before her, flanked by towering oak trees that whispered secrets in the darkness. Behind them stood a mansion, its windows blazing with desperate light. Through the ornate front door, she could hear a man's voice breaking with panic, pleading with someone or something that wouldn't listen. What Nora discovered inside that gilded fortress would shatter everything she thought she knew about wealth, poverty, and the thin line between salvation and destruction. The mansion's front door flew open before Nora could even knock. A man in expensive silk pajamas stood there, his dark hair disheveled, his eyes wild with terror. This was Bobby Thompson, though she didn't know it yet, CEO of Thompson Tech Corp., worth $5 million and completely helpless. In his arms, a small boy writhed and shook, his tiny body convulsing in ways that made Nora's trained heart skip beats. The child's face was flushed with fever, his lips tinged blue around the edges. Bobby's hands trembled as he held his son, and for a moment all the money in the world meant nothing. "Thank God you're here!" Bobby gasped, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Tyler won't stop shaking. The nanny quit yesterday, and I don't know what to do. I called 911, but they said it would be 20 minutes, and I—" His words dissolved into something raw and desperate. This powerful man, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, was reduced to a terrified father watching his child suffer. Nora stepped inside without hesitation, her worn sneakers silent against the marble floor. The mansion's interior was a study in contradictions. Crystal chandeliers cast harsh shadows over scattered medical bottles. Expensive artwork hung crooked on the walls, as if someone had been running past them in panic. On a mahogany side table, a delicate pearl necklace lay forgotten, catching the light like captured tears. The house felt empty despite its grandeur, hollow in the way that only grief could carve out. Tyler's small whimpers echoed off the high ceilings, and Bobby's breathing came in sharp, uneven gasps. Nora knelt beside the Italian leather sofa, where Bobby had placed his son. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking Tyler's pulse, testing his reflexes, speaking in the calm, measured tones that had soothed countless frightened children. "His fever's high, but the convulsions are stopping," she murmured, not looking up from her work. "When did this start?" Bobby hovered beside her, his presence both protective and utterly lost. For the next 30 minutes, she worked steadily, administering medication from her bag, cooling Tyler's fever, whispering soft words that seemed to reach the boy even in his distress. As Tyler's breathing finally settled into something resembling peace, Bobby sank into a chair across from them. His expensive watch, a Rolex that cost more than Nora made in 6 months, caught the lamplight as he rubbed his face with both hands. "I should know how to do this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Fathers should know how to take care of their children." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Nora looked up then, really seeing him for the first time. Beneath the silk pajamas and the marble floors, she saw something achingly familiar. A parent afraid of failing the person they loved most. When Tyler was finally resting peacefully, Nora began packing her supplies back into the weathered medical bag. Bobby watched her every movement, as if memorizing how someone who actually knew what they were doing behaved in a crisis. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, reaching for his wallet with the automatic gesture of someone who solved most problems with money. But Nora was already heading towards the door, her footsteps soft but purposeful. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at the father and son silhouetted against the mansion's opulent backdrop. "Your boy is going to be just fine," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of genuine care rather than professional obligation. Then she was gone, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness like some kind of guardian angel who drove a 20-year-old Honda and lived paycheck to paycheck. Bobby stood in his doorway long after her taillights had vanished, Tyler sleeping peacefully in his arms, wondering why a stranger's kindness felt more real than anything money had ever bought him. The pearl necklace on the side table seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, as if his late wife Catherine was trying to tell him something he wasn't quite ready to hear. The next morning brought the harsh reality of single parenthood crashing back into Bobby's carefully controlled world. Tyler woke up cranky and clingy, asking for the nice lady who had helped him feel better. Bobby found himself staring at his phone, realizing he didn't even know the nurse's name, let alone how to contact her. His housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, had quit the week before, citing Tyler's increasingly difficult behavior. The new nanny had lasted exactly 18 hours before declaring Tyler too emotionally needy and walking out. Now it was just Bobby and his son, rattling around in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Bobby's morning routine had once been precisely choreographed. Up at 5:30, gym by 6, first conference call at 7 sharp. Now he stood in his kitchen at 8:15, staring helplessly at Tyler's untouched breakfast, while his phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from his office. Tyler sat at the marble kitchen island, still in his pajamas, picking at scrambled eggs that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. "I want the lady with the soft voice," Tyler said for the third time, his 7-year-old logic convinced that wishing could make people reappear. The truth was, Bobby had been drowning long before last night's crisis. 18 months ago, Catherine had lost her battle with cancer, and he'd thrown himself into work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun grief. Thompson Tech Corp had flourished under his manic attention, but Tyler had begun to fade like a photograph left too long in sunlight. The boy who once chattered constantly now spoke in whispers. The child who used to race through the house laughing now moved like he was afraid of taking up too much space. Tyler's school called at 10:30. Another incident. Tyler had hidden in the bathroom during recess, crying for his mother. The school counselor, Ms. Peterson, used careful words like adjustment period and professional intervention. But Bobby heard the real message. Your son is struggling, and you're not helping. He left his morning meetings, drove his Tesla through Cedar Falls' winding streets, and sat in the school parking lot for 20 minutes before going inside. Through the classroom window, he watched Tyler sitting alone at a corner desk, drawing pictures of stick figures that all looked impossibly sad. That evening, Bobby stood in Tyler's bedroom doorway, watching his son arrange his toys in perfect, compulsive lines. The boy's concentration was fierce, almost desperate, as if maintaining order in his small corner of the world could somehow make sense of everything else. On Tyler's nightstand, Catherine's photo smiled down at them both, her pearl necklace draped carefully around the frame. Bobby had put it there the day after the funeral, thinking it would comfort his son. Now he wondered if it was just another reminder of everything they'd lost. Tyler looked up suddenly, his eyes bright with an idea that made Bobby's heart clench. "Daddy, can we call the nice lady again? Maybe she could come have dinner with us." The request was so simple, so innocent, and yet it highlighted everything Bobby didn't know how to give his son. He knelt beside Tyler's bed, searching for words that wouldn't sound like another broken promise. "I don't have her phone number, buddy," he said gently. Tyler's face fell, and Bobby felt like he was failing another test he didn't know he was taking. But 3 days later, fate stepped in wearing scrubs and carrying a clipboard. Bobby was in Cedar Falls Memorial's pediatric wing, consulting with Tyler's new doctor about sleep medication, when he heard a familiar voice down the hallway. The same calm, gentle tone that had talked his son through a medical crisis. He followed the sound like a man following water in the desert, and there she was, the mysterious nurse who had appeared in his darkest hour and vanished just as quickly. She was tending to an elderly patient, adjusting his IV with the same careful attention she'd shown Tyler. Nora looked up and saw him standing there, and for a moment surprise flickered across her tired features. She was even smaller than he remembered, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her scrubs faded from countless washings. There was something indefinably sad about her eyes, but when she smiled, it transformed her entire face. "Mr. Thompson, wasn't it? How is Tyler?" The fact that she remembered his son's name, that she cared enough to ask, hit Bobby with unexpected force. "He's been asking about you," Bobby admitted, feeling foolish for the admission. "Actually, he's been asking about you every day since you helped him." Nora's expression softened, and she glanced around the busy hospital corridor as if making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Children remember kindness," she said simply. "It leaves an impression." They stood there in the harsh fluorescent lighting, two strangers connected by a moment of crisis, neither quite sure what to say next. Bobby took a breath and made a decision that surprised him with its spontaneity. Tyler would love to see you again. Maybe you could come to dinner. I could pay you for your time, of course." The offer tumbled out awkwardly, and he immediately regretted how transactional it sounded. But Nora tilted her head, considering, and something in her expression suggested she was seeing past his clumsy words to the desperate father underneath. "I get off at 6, she said finally. "I don't need payment, but I would like to see how Tyler's doing." That evening, Nora's 20-year-old Honda looked impossibly out of place in Bobby's circular driveway, parked between his Tesla and his Porsche like a sparrow among peacocks. She approached the mansion's front door carrying a small paper bag, her steps hesitant. Through the window, Bobby watched her pause and smooth her simple blue dress, probably the nicest thing she owned, he realized, and felt something twist in his chest. Tyler had been bouncing off the walls with excitement since Bobby told him about their dinner guest. When the doorbell rang, Tyler raced to answer it, his face lighting up like Christmas morning. "It's the nice lady! Daddy, she came back!" Nora knelt down to Tyler's eye level, and Bobby watched his son's entire posture change, relaxing in a way it hadn't since Catherine died. "I brought you something," Nora said, pulling a small origami crane from her paper bag. "My mother taught me how to make these when I was your age. They're supposed to bring good luck." The dinner that followed was unlike anything Bobby had experienced in months. Tyler, who usually picked at his food in sullen silence, chatted away about school, his friends, his drawings, directing most of his conversation toward Nora as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. She listened with complete attention, asking questions that made Tyler feel important, laughing at his jokes in a way that wasn't condescending. Bobby found himself relaxing too, the constant tension in his shoulders easing as he watched his son be genuinely happy. After Tyler went to bed, going willingly for the first time in weeks, Bobby and Nora sat in the living room with coffee. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with unspoken questions. "You're good with him," Bobby said finally. "Tyler doesn't open up to people usually, not since his mother died." Nora set down her coffee cup carefully, her fingers tracing the expensive china as if she were afraid of breaking it. "Children know when someone really sees them," she replied. "Tyler's been trying so hard to be good, to not be trouble. Sometimes they just need permission to be kids again." The observation was so accurate it took Bobby's breath away. "I don't know how to do this alone," he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I can run a company, I can negotiate deals worth millions, but I can't figure out how to make my 7-year-old son happy." Nora looked at him with something that wasn't pity, but wasn't quite sympathy either. "Maybe you're trying too hard to be perfect," she said gently. "Tyler doesn't need a perfect father. He just needs his father." As Nora prepared to leave, Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Will you come back?" he called down. "Please." Nora glanced at Bobby, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "If your dad says it's okay, I'd like to come back," she told Tyler. The boy beamed and disappeared back upstairs, and Bobby felt something he hadn't experienced in 18 months. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Over the following weeks, Nora became a regular presence in their lives. She would arrive after her hospital shifts, never staying late, never overstepping boundaries, but somehow filling a space in their home that Bobby hadn't realized was empty. Tyler's transformation was remarkable. He started sleeping through the night, eating his meals, even laughing at Bobby's terrible dad jokes. The house began to feel less like a mausoleum, and more like a place where people actually lived. Bobby found himself looking forward to these evenings with an intensity that surprised him. Not just because Tyler was happier, though that was part of it, but because Nora's presence seemed to bring out a version of himself he'd forgotten existed. She had a way of asking questions that made him think, of listening that made him want to share things he'd kept locked away since Catherine's death. When she taught Tyler to fold paper flowers, Bobby sat beside them, his expensive suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, learning something he'd never imagined wanting to know. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Tyler made an observation that stopped both adults in their tracks. "Miss Nora, you make Daddy laugh like Mommy used to." The words hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Tyler didn't seem to notice the sudden tension, but Bobby felt his chest tighten with a familiar combination of guilt and longing. Nora's hand stilled on the dishes she was washing, and when Bobby looked at her, he saw something complicated and painful flash across her features. Later, after Tyler was asleep, Bobby found Nora standing in the living room, looking at Catherine's portrait on the mantelpiece. The painting showed his wife in her favorite blue dress, her pearl necklace catching the light, her smile warm and welcoming. She was beautiful, Nora said softly. Bobby joined her in front of the fireplace, and for a long moment they stood side by side in silence. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "Catherine always said you could tell everything about a person by how they treated children." The words seemed to affect Nora strangely. She turned away from the portrait, her expression suddenly guarded. "I should go," she said, gathering her things with movements that seemed more hurried than usual. Bobby wanted to ask what was wrong, but something in her posture warned him off. At the door she paused. "Tyler's doing so much better," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "He's going to be fine." There was something final in her tone that made Bobby's stomach clench with inexplicable dread. That night, Bobby lay awake thinking about the way Nora had looked at Catherine's portrait, about the sadness that sometimes flickered behind her eyes when she thought no one was watching. He realized how little he actually knew about the woman who had become so important to his son, to both of them. She never talked about her family, her past, her life outside the hospital. When Tyler asked her questions about herself, she always redirected the conversation back to him. It was as if she existed only in the present tense, with no history to speak of. The next morning brought clarity in the form of an unexpected phone call. Dr. Martinez from Cedar Falls Children's Hospital was calling to follow up on Tyler's recent visit. During their conversation, he mentioned something that made Bobby's blood run cold. "I'm glad you found Nora," Dr. Martinez said casually. She was one of our best nurses before she transferred. Wonderful with terminal cases. Your wife spoke very highly of her during her treatment here." The words hit Bobby like a physical blow, and he had to sit down to steady himself. Catherine had been treated at Children's Hospital during her final months. Catherine had known Nora, the woman who had appeared in his life like an answer to prayer, who had somehow known exactly how to care for Tyler, who had looked at Catherine's portrait with such strange recognition. She had been there during the worst period of Bobby's life, and he'd never even known it. The realization left him feeling dizzy and slightly sick. Bobby spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what he'd learned. He searched through Catherine's belongings, looking for some mention of Nora, some indication that his wife had talked about their son's future care. In Catherine's jewelry box, beneath old earrings and forgotten bracelets, he found something that made his hands shake. A photograph of Catherine in her hospital bed, smiling weakly at the camera, with a young nurse standing beside her. The nurse was wearing scrubs and looked years younger, but there was no mistaking those kind eyes, that gentle smile. It was Nora. When Nora arrived that evening, Bobby was waiting for her in the living room with the photograph in his lap. Tyler was upstairs doing homework, safely out of earshot. She took one look at Bobby's face and knew that their careful, comfortable routine was about to shatter. "You found out," she said quietly, not even glancing at the photo. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "I was wondering when you would. You knew my wife." It wasn't a question, but Bobby said it anyway, needing to hear the words out loud. "You took care of Catherine during her final months, and you never said anything. Why?" Nora moved to the window, looking out at the garden where Tyler sometimes played. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because I promised her I wouldn't," she said simply. "Catherine made me swear I would never tell you or Tyler that I knew her." The confession opened floodgates Bobby hadn't even known existed. "She talked about you and Tyler constantly," Nora continued, her voice growing stronger. "She showed me pictures, videos. She told me about Tyler's favorite bedtime stories, about how you sang off-key in the shower, about the origami cranes you two made together when she was too sick to get out of bed. She was so worried about what would happen to both of you after she was gone." Bobby felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "So you, decided to insert yourself into our lives? Is that what this is about? Some kind of deathbed promise?" His words came out harsher than he'd intended, but the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Everything he'd thought was real, every moment of connection he'd felt with Nora, suddenly seemed calculated and false. "Did Catherine ask you to take care of us? Is that why you arranged that call?" Nora's face went pale. "I didn't arrange anything. That really was a wrong number, a mistake. I had no idea where you lived, what you looked like, nothing beyond what Catherine told me in the hospital. When I saw you that night, when I realized who you were—" She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold. "I should have told you then. I know I should have. But Tyler needed help, and I couldn't just walk away. So everything since then has been what? Charity? Obligation?" Bobby stood up, pacing to the fireplace where Catherine's portrait seemed to watch them both with knowing eyes. "My son adores you, Nora. He's happier than he's been since his mother died. And now I find out it's all been some kind of memorial service for my dead wife?" The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but he couldn't seem to stop them from coming. Tyler's voice from the top of the stairs cut through their argument like a knife. "Why are you yelling?" The little boy stood there in his pajamas, looking between the two adults with wide, frightened eyes. Bobby realized with horror that Tyler had heard at least part of their conversation. "Miss Nora, are you crying? Did I do something wrong?" The pure confusion in his son's voice was like a punch to Bobby's gut. Nora wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Grown-ups sometimes have complicated feelings about things, that's all. She knelt down as Tyler came down the stairs, but the boy looked uncertain, sensing the tension even if he couldn't understand it. Are you going to stop coming to see us? Tyler asked, and the fear in his voice was heartbreaking. Bobby watched his son's face crumple with the possibility of another loss, another important person disappearing from his life. The rage and hurt he'd been feeling transformed into something colder and more protective. Miss Nora needs some time to think about things, Bobby said carefully. Why don't you go brush your teeth, and I'll be up in a few minutes to tuck you in. Tyler looked between them one more time, then trudged upstairs, his small shoulders slumped with defeat. When Tyler was gone, the silence between Bobby and Nora felt like broken glass. I never meant for it to happen this way, Nora whispered. I never meant to fall in. She stopped herself, but Bobby had heard enough. To fall in what? Love? With the grieving widower and his damaged son? Is that part of what Catherine asked you to do? His voice was cruel, and he knew it, but the pain of feeling manipulated was stronger than his better judgment. Nora looked at him for a long moment, her face a map of hurt and resignation. Catherine never asked me to do anything except remember that you and Tyler were good people who deserved happiness. Everything else, coming here, caring about Tyler, caring about you, that was all me being selfish enough to want something I could never have. She moved toward the door, gathering her purse and jacket with the careful movements of someone trying not to fall apart. Nora, wait! Bobby started, suddenly unsure, but she was already shaking her head. Tyler will be fine without me. You both will. You just needed someone to remind you how to be happy together again. Now you know. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. For what it's worth, Catherine was right. You're both worth loving. Then she was gone, leaving Bobby alone with his son's broken heart and his own confused anger. The weeks that followed were harder than Bobby had anticipated. Tyler asked about Miss Nora constantly, his improvement in mood and behavior slowly reversing. Bobby tried to explain without revealing the full truth, but 7-year-olds have a way of sensing when adults are hiding something important. Tyler became withdrawn again, his appetite disappeared, and the nightmares returned. Bobby found himself missing Nora's presence too, missing her gentle laugh, and the way she made their house feel like a home. Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to come back as their housekeeper, but she wasn't a replacement for what Tyler had lost. The boy went through the motions of his daily routine, but the light had gone out of his eyes. At school, he started getting into trouble. Nothing serious, just the kind of acting out that comes from deep unhappiness. Bobby increased his sessions with the child psychologist, but Tyler refused to talk about his feelings. I don't want to talk about Miss Nora, he would say stubbornly. I want her to come back. Bobby threw himself into work with renewed intensity, but even the demands of running a company couldn't distract him from the growing certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd been so focused on feeling betrayed that he'd failed to see what should have been obvious. Nora's care for Tyler was genuine, had always been genuine. The fact that she'd known Catherine didn't diminish that. If anything, it explained why she understood Tyler so well, why she'd known exactly what the boy needed. 1 month after their confrontation, Bobby found himself standing outside Nora's apartment building in the rundown part of Cedar Falls. The contrast to his own neighborhood was stark. Cracked sidewalks instead of manicured lawns, chain-link fences instead of wrought-iron gates. He'd gotten her address from the hospital directory, though he wasn't entirely sure why he was there. Maybe to apologize. Maybe to ask her to come back. Maybe just to see if she was okay. The apartment building was a 3-story brick structure that had seen better decades. Bobby climbed to the 2nd floor and stood outside apartment 2B, listening to the sounds of other people's lives filtering through thin walls. A television playing too loudly. A baby crying. someone practicing violin badly. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he going to say? How do you apologize for accusing someone of manipulating your grief? Before he could make up his mind, the door opened. Nora stood there in jeans and an oversized sweater, looking surprised but not particularly pleased to see him. "Bobby, what are you doing here?" Behind her, he could see into her small studio apartment. It was clean but sparse, furnished with hand-me-downs and garage sale finds. On her kitchen table, he could see medical textbooks open. She was studying for something, advancing her career in the quiet way of people who couldn't afford to stop moving forward. "Tyler's not doing well," Bobby said, because it was the most honest thing he could think of. "He misses you. We both do." Nora's expression softened slightly, but she didn't invite him in. "I'm sorry I accused you of manipulating us. I was angry and hurt, and I took it out on you when you were just trying to help." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Nora leaned against her doorframe, looking tired. "I should have told you about Catherine from the beginning. I know that now, I didn't know how to explain without it sounding like exactly what you thought it was." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "How is Tyler really doing?" Bobby found himself describing his son's regression, the return of nightmares and behavioral problems, the way Tyler kept asking when Miss Nora was coming back. As he talked, he watched Nora's face, saw the pain there, the genuine concern for a child she'd grown to love. "He drew you a picture," Bobby said finally, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "He keeps drawing pictures of you and asking me to mail them to you, but I didn't have your address until today." Nora unfolded Tyler's drawing, a crayon masterpiece showing 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. "Daddy, Miss Nora, and me," was written in careful 7-year-old handwriting across the bottom. Nora's eyes filled with tears as she looked at it. "He's got you in the middle," she said softly. "Like you're holding us all together." Bobby looked at the drawing again and realized Tyler had been right about something fundamental that all the adults had missed. "Come back," Bobby said suddenly. "Please, I don't care why you came into our lives originally. I only care that Tyler needs you and—" He paused, then took the leap. "And I think I'm falling in love with you." The admission hung in the air between them, surprising them both with its honesty. Nora looked up from Tyler's drawing, her eyes wide. "Bobby, you don't understand. There are things about me, about my connection to Catherine, that you don't know." But before she could explain further, Bobby's phone rang. Tyler's school. The principal's voice was carefully controlled but urgent. Tyler had collapsed during recess and been rushed to Cedar Falls Memorial. Bobby's world tilted sideways. "I have to go," he said to Nora, already turning towards the stairs. Behind him, he heard her door slam and her footsteps following him. They rode to the hospital in Bobby's car, the silence heavy with fear and unfinished conversations. At the hospital, Tyler was conscious but listless, hooked up to monitors and IVs. The doctor explained that the boy had suffered from dehydration and exhaustion. He hadn't been eating or sleeping properly for weeks. Children can make themselves physically sick from emotional distress, the doctor said gently. "Has there been any major change in his routine recently?" Bobby felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. His anger, his need to protect Tyler from what he'd seen as deception, had ended up hurting his son more than any perceived betrayal ever could have. Tyler's face lit up when he saw Nora enter his hospital room. "Miss Nora, you came back." His voice was weak but full of joy. Nora sat beside his bed, taking his small hand in hers, and Bobby watched his son's entire body relax for the first time in a month. "I missed you so much," Tyler whispered. "I thought you didn't want to be my friend anymore." Nora's voice was gentle but firm when she replied, I will always be your friend, Tyler. Always. I'm sorry I stayed away for so long. As Tyler drifted off to sleep, calmed by Nora's presence, Bobby found himself really looking at her for the first time since he'd discovered her connection to Catherine. She was exhausted, he realized. Dark circles under her eyes, her clothes hanging a little loose, as if she hadn't been eating well either. "You've been hurting too," he said quietly. Nora nodded, not taking her eyes off Tyler's sleeping form. "Losing you and Tyler felt like losing Catherine all over again," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much I'd come to think of you as my family until you were gone." That night, as Tyler slept peacefully in his hospital bed with both adults watching over him, Nora finally told Bobby the whole truth. She'd grown up in foster care, never knowing her real family. Catherine had been more than just a patient to her. She'd been the closest thing to family Nora had ever known. She used to say I reminded her of the daughter she'd always wanted. Nora said softly. And she made me promise that if I ever had the chance, I would make sure you and Tyler knew you were loved. The wrong number call really was an accident. Nora continued. But when I saw you with Tyler that night, when I realized who you were, I felt like Catherine had somehow arranged it. Maybe that sounds crazy, but I couldn't just walk away. And then Tyler was so sweet, and you were trying so hard, and I started to care about you both for my own reasons, not just because of Catherine. Bobby reached across the space between their hospital chairs and took Nora's hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I made you feel like your feelings weren't real. I was scared of being hurt again, scared of Tyler getting attached to someone else who might leave." Nora squeezed his hand gently. "I understand why you were angry. I should have been honest from the beginning. I was scared too. Scared you'd think I was just some weird nurse with boundary issues." Tyler stirred in his sleep, and both adults turned their attention to him. In the soft light of the hospital room, with machines beeping quietly and the sound of nurses making their rounds in the hallway, Bobby felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for months. "I meant what I said earlier," he told Nora quietly. "About falling in love with you. That's not about Catherine or promises or anything else. That's just about you, about who you are and how you make Tyler laugh and how you make me want to be a better father." Nora was quiet for so long that Bobby began to worry he'd said too much. Then she turned to look at him directly, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. "I love you too," she said simply. "Both of you. I tried to convince myself it was just about keeping a promise to Catherine. But that was never true. Tyler feels like the son I never thought I'd have. And you..." She paused, searching for words. "You make me feel like I belong somewhere." The next morning, Tyler woke up stronger and more like himself than he'd been in weeks. The doctor was pleased with his recovery and cleared him for discharge with instructions for rest and proper nutrition. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Tyler made an announcement that surprised both adults. "I want to put Mommy's necklace on Miss Nora," he said matter-of-factly. "Mommy would want Miss Nora to have it." Back at home, Bobby retrieved Catherine's pearl necklace from Tyler's room while Nora helped the boy get settled on the living room couch. When Bobby returned, Tyler was already arranging the scene in his 7-year-old mind, positioning everyone just so. "Miss Nora, you sit here by Daddy," he instructed. "And Daddy, you put the necklace on Miss Nora like in the movies." It was such a solemn, important moment in Tyler's world that neither adult had the heart to object. As Bobby fastened Catherine's pearl necklace around Nora's neck, his fingers brushed against her skin, and he felt her shiver slightly. The pearls looked right on her, as if Catherine had chosen them specifically for this moment. Tyler clapped his hands together, satisfied with his arrangement. "Now Miss Nora looks like a mommy too," he declared. The innocent observation made both adults catch their breath, but Tyler was already moving on to his next important 7-year-old business. That evening, after Tyler had eaten a full dinner and gone to bed without protest, Bobby and Nora sat together on the living room couch. The house felt different somehow, warmer, more complete. "So what happens now?" Nora asked, unconsciously touching the pearl necklace. Bobby considered the question seriously. "Now we figure it out as we go," he said. "No more secrets, no more running away when things get complicated. Just us, being honest about what we want." "What do you want?" Nora asked, and Bobby realized it was the first time in 18 months that he'd felt hopeful about the future. "I want Tyler to keep being happy. I want to learn how to be the kind of father he deserves, and I want you to stay, not because of any promise you made to Catherine, but because you choose to be here with us." He paused, then added, "What do you want?" Nora smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded smile he'd ever seen from her. "I want to wake up in a house where people are glad to see me. I want to help Tyler with his homework and teach him to make paper flowers. I want to love you without feeling guilty about it. I want to stop living like I'm just temporarily borrowing someone else's life." She looked around the living room, at Tyler's toys scattered on the expensive furniture, at Catherine's portrait smiling down at them from the mantelpiece. "I want this to be real." 6 months later, the house on Hillcrest Drive had settled into new rhythms. Tyler's backpack by the front door, Nora's medical textbooks on the kitchen counter, Bobby's work laptop sharing space with origami paper and crayons. The formal dining room had been converted into Tyler's art studio, where he created masterpieces that covered every available surface. The living room had been rearranged to be more comfortable than impressive, with soft throws and reading nooks, and the kind of warm lighting that made everything feel like home. Tyler had grown 2 inches and gained the confident swagger of a child who knew he was loved without question. He called Nora Mom Nora now, a title that had evolved naturally without any formal discussion. Catherine's portrait still held a place of honor on the mantelpiece, but it no longer felt like a shrine to the past. Instead, it felt like a blessing on the present, a reminder that love didn't have to end when life changed. Nora had moved into the guest room initially, but gradually her belongings had migrated throughout the house until it became clear that artificial boundaries were pointless. She still worked at the hospital, but had started taking classes toward her nurse practitioner degree. Bobby had restructured his work schedule to be home every evening by 6, discovering that the company could function perfectly well without his constant oversight. On this particular evening, Tyler was sprawled on the living room floor, working on a 1,000-piece puzzle of a lighthouse, while Nora graded practice tests for her pharmacology class. Bobby was attempting to cook dinner, a skill he'd been developing with mixed results since Nora had gently suggested that ordering takeout every night wasn't sustainable. The smoke alarm had only gone off twice, which he considered progress. "Daddy, are you burning the chicken again?" Tyler called from the living room without looking up from his puzzle. "Mom, Nora, I think you better go help him before he sets the kitchen on fire." Nora laughed and closed her textbook, but before she could get up, Bobby appeared in the doorway with a triumphant expression. "No fires tonight," he announced, "and I think it's actually edible this time." Dinner was in fact edible, though Tyler made a show of being suspicious of anything Bobby cooked. They talked about Tyler's upcoming school play, Nora's exam schedule, Bobby's plans for expanding the company's family support programs. It was the kind of ordinary conversation that would have bored Bobby senseless 18 months ago, but now felt like the most important part of his day. After dinner, Tyler disappeared upstairs to take his bath, leaving Bobby and Nora to clean up the kitchen together. It was a routine they'd developed without discussion, Bobby washing dishes while Nora dried and put them away, moving around each other in the kind of synchronized dance that came from practice and comfort. Tyler asked me something interesting today, Nora said as she dried a serving bowl. Oh yeah? What's that? Bobby asked, concentrating on scrubbing a particularly stubborn pan. He asked if we were going to get married. Nora's words made Bobby's hands still in the soapy water. They'd been living together, functioning as a family unit, but they'd never actually discussed making it official. What did you tell him? Bobby asked carefully. Nora set down the dish towel and turned to face him. I told him that some families don't need a wedding to be real families, but that if two people want to get married, it's because they choose to promise to love each other forever. She paused, then added, Then he asked if we choose that. Bobby turned off the water and dried his hands, giving himself time to think. Do we choose that? He asked, echoing Tyler's question. Nora smiled, the expression soft and certain. I think we've been choosing it every day for months now. The question is whether we want to make it official. Bobby reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the counter between them. I was actually planning to ask you properly, with dinner and flowers and all that, but Tyler has a way of getting right to the point. Nora stared at the ring box for a moment, then looked up at Bobby with eyes bright with surprise and joy. You were planning to propose? I've been planning to propose for 3 months, Bobby admitted. I kept waiting for the perfect moment, but then I realized we don't need perfect moments. We just need honest ones. He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, not too flashy, the kind of jewelry someone might choose for everyday wear rather than special occasions. It's beautiful, Nora whispered, but she didn't take the ring. Instead, she looked at Bobby seriously. Are you sure? I mean really sure? Because Tyler's watching everything we do, and if we do this, it has to be forever. I won't be another person who disappears from his life. Bobby took the ring from the box and held it out to her. The only thing I'm more sure about than wanting to marry you is wanting Tyler to have you as his mum forever. Will you marry us? Tyler's voice from the top of the stairs interrupted Nora's answer. Are you guys getting engaged down there? Because if you are, I want to watch. Both adults laughed, and Bobby called upstairs, Come down here, buddy. You should definitely watch this. Tyler thundered down the stairs in his pajamas, sliding across the kitchen floor in his socks, and coming to a stop right beside them. Miss Nora, I mean, Mom Nora, are you going to marry Daddy? Tyler asked with the directness that only children possess. Nora knelt down to Tyler's eye level, her expression serious. Would you like me to marry your daddy? Yes, Tyler said without hesitation. Then we'll really be a family forever and ever, and you can't leave even if we're bad. The innocent statement made both adults' hearts clench with love for this boy who had learned too young that people could disappear. Nora looked up at Bobby, then back at Tyler. Okay then. Yes, I'll marry your daddy. Tyler whooped with joy and threw his arms around both adults, creating a 3-way hug in the middle of the kitchen. As Bobby slipped the ring onto Nora's finger, Catherine's pearl necklace caught the light around her neck, and for just a moment it felt like they had one more person's blessing on their decision. The wedding planning that followed was refreshingly uncomplicated. Tyler had strong opinions about everything from the color of the flowers to the flavor of the cake, and his enthusiasm was infectious. They decided on a small ceremony in the backyard, with just close friends and Tyler in his first real tuxedo serving as ring-bearer. Nora's colleague from the hospital would serve as maid of honor, and Bobby's business partner James would be best man. Tyler took his wedding duties very seriously, practicing walking slowly and carrying the pillow with the rings. He'd also appointed himself in charge of music selection, insisting that they needed happy songs that make people want to dance. The boy who had once been withdrawn and sad was now bubbling with excitement about their family celebration. 3 weeks before the wedding, Nora made a decision that surprised even herself. She asked Bobby if they could visit Catherine's grave together. just the two of them. Bobby had avoided the cemetery since the funeral, but something about Nora's request felt important. They drove there on a sunny Saturday morning while Tyler was at a friend's birthday party, bringing fresh flowers and a strange sense of nervous anticipation. Catherine's headstone was simple and elegant, marking her 32 years with dates and the words, "Beloved wife and mother." Bobby knelt and placed the flowers while Nora stood quietly beside him. "I wanted to tell her about the wedding," Nora said finally. "I know that probably sounds strange, but I feel like she should know that Tyler's going to be okay, that we're all going to be okay." Bobby stood and took Nora's hand. "It doesn't sound strange at all. Catherine would want to know." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the wind in the trees and feeling the warm sun on their faces. Finally, Nora spoke again. "Thank you for trusting me with Tyler, for trusting me with both of you. I promise I'll take good care of your family." "Our family," Bobby corrected gently, and Nora smiled. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect weather that made everyone agree Catherine must have had a hand in planning it. Tyler woke up early, too excited to sleep, and spent the morning helping with last-minute preparations while wearing his tuxedo jacket over his pajama pants. By afternoon, the backyard had been transformed into something magical, with white lights strung between the trees and flowers everywhere. As Nora walked down the makeshift aisle in a simple white dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical, Tyler walked beside her, with the ring pillow held carefully in front of him. Bobby watched them approach and felt his throat tighten with emotion. This woman who had started as a stranger, who had come into their lives through a wrong number and a moment of crisis, was about to become his wife and Tyler's mother. The ceremony was short and sweet, with vows that focused on family and commitment and the kind of love that showed up in everyday moments rather than grand gestures. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Tyler cheered loudly before either adult could kiss, making everyone laugh. The reception was a backyard barbecue with dancing and cake, and the kind of relaxed celebration that felt exactly right for their unconventional family story. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Bobby, Nora, and Tyler sat together on the back porch swing, still in their wedding clothes but with shoes kicked off, and Tyler curled up between his parents. "So what happens now?" Tyler asked, echoing the question Nora had asked months earlier. Bobby and Nora exchanged glances over his head, and Nora smiled. "Now we keep being a family," she said simply. "We have breakfast together and help you with homework and argue about what movie to watch on Friday nights. We do all the ordinary things that make life beautiful." Tyler considered this seriously, then nodded his approval. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast tomorrow? The really big ones that are bigger than the plate? We can have whatever kind of pancakes you want," Bobby promised, pulling both Tyler and Nora closer. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. It was the kind of perfect moment that Tyler would remember for the rest of his life, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because everything that mattered was exactly where it should be. Years later, when people asked Tyler about his family, he would tell them about the night his mom first came to their house, about how she'd appeared like magic when they needed her most. He would talk about his first mom in heaven and his mom at home, about how love didn't always look the way you expected it to, but it always felt like coming home. And sometimes, when he was feeling particularly philosophical, he would add that the best things in life came from wrong numbers and second chances and people who showed up anyway, even when they didn't have to. But that was still years in the future. For now, there was just the three of them on the porch swing, Tyler's sleepy breathing between them and Catherine's pearls catching the light around Nora's neck. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, Just the quiet satisfaction of a family that had found its way to each other through love and loss, and the kind of everyday miracle that happened when people chose to stay.